The popular imagination is held captive by the missile launch. This is a deliberate misdirection. You are trained to watch the sky for incoming warheads, but the primary vector of systemic collapse is not a hypersonic glide vehicle. It is silence. Over 97% of global data, including quadrillions in financial transactions, travels through a handful of undersea fiber optic cables. While legacy media reports on tariff escalations, CSIS analysis identifies these cables as the undefended jugular of the Western economic system. The real asymmetric response to economic pressure is not symmetrical force, it is the silent vector. Severing these connections, or blinding the satellite architecture that underpins GPS and military command, does not simply disrupt communication. It creates a blind leviathan. The most powerful kinetic force in human history, rendered sensor-deprived and operating on memory and protocol alone. An aircraft carrier group without data is a multi-billion-dollar liability. A global financial system without data is a solvency event in waiting. This is the true launch-on-warning scenario. A state apparatus, blinded and facing what Fortune magazine calls the threat of economic collapse, forced to interpret silence as a kinetic precursor. This is the asymmetric escalation protocol. It removes choice from the equation, creating a direct vector from a currency crisis to a terminal strategic miscalculation. A state does not project force from a position of strength, but from a position of terminal decline. War is the ultimate tool of liability management. When a nation's balance sheet approaches insolvency, when its domestic obligations can no longer be serviced by its economic output, it is forced to pivot. It must export the crisis. Observe the blueprint. CSIS analysis confirms that for Russia, the war became a systemic function to manage a domestic solvency crisis. Faced with an unpopular conflict and a strained treasury, the state's survival protocol demands externalizing the cost. It is a launch-on-warning response to internal economic collapse. This is a feature, not a bug, of modern conflict. The objective is not territory, but financial restructuring of the target. Following kinetic intervention, Libya's central bank announced a systemic 14.7% devaluation of its dinar. The war achieved its financial objective, the liquidation of a sovereign balance sheet. The mechanism is now inverted against its architect. As escalating tariff wars fail to provide leverage and fears mount over the dollar's reserve status, the United States' own solvency is brought into question. When economic instruments are exhausted, the pivot to asymmetry is a mathematical certainty. The kinetic cost becomes the final tool. The central equation governing kinetic conflict has been shattered. According to the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the cost differential is now a systemic vector of risk. A $5 million main battle tank can be neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not an anomaly. It is the new mathematical reality of the battlefield. This phenomenon is termed the democratization of violence. It signifies the collapse of the state's monopoly on high-impact kinetic force. When the tools of lethality become exponentially cheaper, the economic barrier to entry for projecting power dissolves. For a hegemon accustomed to leveraging immense capital expenditure for military dominance, its entire hardware arsenal transitions from an asset to a systemic liability. Every billion-dollar carrier and every advanced fighter jet becomes a high-value target for a low-cost threat, inverting the entire financial model of deterrence. While legacy media reports on regional chaos, they fail to identify the blueprint. What you are witnessing is not random instability. It is the activation of designated gray zones. These are proxy laboratories, geographically isolated environments where new protocols for kinetic statecraft are tested and refined. The objective is not nation building, It is stress testing a system of global control as its economic pillars degrade. The operational blueprint is documented. A Small Wars Journal analysis of the U.S. operation in Venezuela reveals the vector. Power projection is no longer a last resort, but a primary instrument to manage a collapsing economic sphere. The kinetic cost of intervention is pre-calculated against the systemic risk of a sovereign nation escaping the dollar-denominated debt architecture. This is not war. It is a solvency calculation. The aftermath of such operations provides the clearest data. Look at Libya. Years after kinetic intervention, Channel Africa reports its central bank executing a massive 14.7% devaluation of its currency. This is the intended result, the complete neutralization of monetary sovereignty. The nation is rendered a permanent economic tributary, its assets liquidated, its currency a case study in what happens when a state is removed from the board. These proxy laboratories are activated with increasing frequency because the primary tool of U.S. hegemony, the dollar, is transitioning from a global asset to a systemic liability. As reported by Fortune, tariff escalations directly trigger fears over U.S. debt and the dollar's reserve status. The World Socialist website confirms these economic conflicts are expanding, even with traditional allies like the EU. As economic leverage evaporates, the reliance on kinetic force becomes a mathematical certainty. Therefore, do not mistake internal strife in nations like South Africa, or even CSIS warnings about Canadian instability as the core threat. They are symptoms. They are signals that the system is scouting for new laboratories. The protocol dictates that any nation possessing critical resources while experiencing a solvency crisis is a candidate for gray zone activation. The vector is clear. Currency crisis is the precursor to kinetic intervention, which itself serves as a launch-on warning protocol for a full-spectrum solvency crisis. The final escalation protocol is not a choice. It is a mathematical function of time. It is called launch-on warning. If early warning systems detect an adversary's incoming nuclear strike, a nation must launch its own arsenal before its silos are destroyed. The decision window is not hours, but minutes. This is a systemic feature, not a bug, designed to guarantee mutual destruction and deter a first strike. However, this Cold War calculus is now compromised. Analysts at CSIS have modeled the fog of digital war. A sophisticated state-level cyber attack does not need to detonate a weapon. It only needs to blind the sensors. By disabling or spoofing the data from early warning radar and satellite networks, an aggressor can trigger a catastrophic dilemma. The commander is now operating blind. Is the data loss a technical malfunction, or is it the deliberate blinding that precedes a full-scale decapitation strike? The protocol of launch-on warning was not designed for this ambiguity. According to RUSI, the logic dictates assuming the worst. To wait for visual confirmation is to risk total annihilation. Fear of a successful first strike forces an automated response. This is the kinetic cost of a solvency crisis. For a nation facing economic collapse and unable to compete conventionally, a cyber-first strike is the ultimate asymmetric leverage. It forces the hegemon into an impossible choice, turning its own deterrence protocol into a liability. The vector is direct. A digital blackout, triggered by economic desperation, can force a nuclear launch. The system is designed to escalate. The asymmetric escalation protocol requires periodic testing. The transition from economic leverage to kinetic threat cannot be declared. It must be demonstrated. As U.S. debt and solvency concerns drive tariff wars, the kinetic cost of maintaining the system must be calibrated. Analysts at RUSI project the next phase is not a conventional strike, but a systemic one. Within the next 12 months, expect a logistics blackout targeting a Tier 1 global shipping port. A coordinated, attribution-impossible cyber-physical attack will disable crane operations and customs clearance for 48-72 hours, creating a multi-billion-dollar disruption. This is not sabotage. This is a calibration shot, a non-lethal signal referenced in frameworks analyzed by the Small Wars Journal, demonstrating the capability to sever global supply chains at will. It is a mathematical reminder of where true systemic leverage now resides.